Hi everyone. My name's Dianne and I have done exports for a long, long time. I haven't done a lot of veggie exports, but I have done a lot of agriculture and machinery and helicopters and all sorts of things. And basically export doesn't change whatever way and whatever product you're interested in. What you do need to do is have a plan. So firstly, I'd like to quickly talk about the Export Council. I've been involved with the Export Council for a long time. Sorry, I've been told to talk into the mic, so I can't really move too much. The Export Council is 61 years young, and we've been doing training mainly for the first probably 20, 30 years of our existence. And that was really, really important to build up the skills development of Australian exporters. What we have evolved into over the last 30, 40 years since the beginning is offering much more to our members. We're a not-for-profit member-based organisation that does a lot of things behind the scene to improve the benefits of exporting. So we have, as you can see there, we have our skills development, which is probably one of the, or is the most important part of our offerings. We also have advice lines, so if someone wants to ring up and ask, what do I need to do to export a carrot to somewhere, or a helicopter or a machine or whatever, we're there to give advice. We have coaching. We do that with lots of export courses. We actually, by the way, do import, which you're probably not wanting to know about, but whatever goes out sometimes has a lot of components that have come in. So packaging, maybe fertilisers, all sorts of things that come into Australia end up going back out in some shape or form. We also do research, and this is really important. We do research on countries overseas. We do research on free trade agreements. We've just done a really good research on the Korean free trade agreement, and these are available on our website. So please have a look at those. They're very, very informative and inform our members and anyone that would like to have a look how the Korean Free Trade Agreement will work for them. We also do advocacy, and this is also very important. Just last Friday, we appeared before JSCOT, which is the Joint Standing Committee on Trade, to voice our support for the TPP-11. You've probably heard of that. That's the latest trade policy that we have signed off on but not ratified yet. So the JSCOT discussions on Friday were all about the government looking, or the Committee on Trade looking at whether we will sign off on it. I hope we do. I'll talk a little bit about JSCOT and the TPP in a moment when we get to that in the few slides on, but it's very, very important that the free trade agreements keep building and we keep looking at free trade agreements. Okay. Public workshops. We do a lot of training in public workshops, and that's how Michael and I have got to know each other. We do a lot of training for AusVeg. We've developed particularly unified training for getting into export for AusVeg. There are always exporters in the room that are doing exports already that come to these training sessions, and I guarantee they always learn something of interest to improve their systems and benefits when trading. We run the Export Awards in a number of states in Australia, and I would like to encourage anyone that would like to look at whether they qualify for an export award, and anyone can qualify in the sense of anyone that's exporting. It's not on how much you export, it's on the system of your exporting, how you are innovative, how you actually get into the export market. It's on those sorts of things, not how much you export. So please don't worry about the fact, I'll give you an example. Macquarie Bank, Macquarie Limited, big company, didn't win the export award one particular year when they entered. There was a very small company that beat them to the punch on that. So it doesn't go on size or amount of income or anything like that. So please consider the Export Awards. We have an office in WA, we have an office in Melbourne, we have an office in Queensland, and our head office is in New South Wales. So please talk to our office about where and how you can enter the Export Awards. Okay, going global. I'm not going to repeat a lot of things that David has said, but a lot of my presentation is based on some of the comments that, you know, why export, what's the strategy for export, all of those sorts of things. So Why would you export? Basically, I remember someone at an export award was asked the same question, and they were very honest. They said to make money. So at the end of the day, it is to make money. That's why you do anything in business. It's to make money. It's to increase profits, to reduce risk and balance growth, to lower unit costs, to economies of scale, minimise seasonal fluctuations in sales. All of that is pretty much very common thoughts. Nothing special about that. But exporting gives you that benefit to increase your sales. We have a very small economy in Australia. If you want to grow and use your product to advantage, then you need to look at the export market. One of the facts in Australia is that we have about 95% of our companies are SMEs, and only 14% of those SMEs. This is not just the veggie industry. This is across the board. Only 14% of those industries, those SMEs, export. If we were to increase the level to 25%, which isn't a lot higher, and it's not even half of our SME numbers, our GDP income would increase to $36 billion a year. So that's a very good reason as an Australian to export, to increase our economies, to increase our viability, to increase our GDP, to make Australia even stronger and more diligent and favourable in the world. Okay, preparing to go global. Okay, you need to do a number of things, and that's not just, think about what country you want to go to. You need to have a decision and make a firm decision that you want to export. Now, I know there's exporters in the room and you've made that decision, but there are some things you need to probably consider to even be more successful in the export market. The motivation to grow your business internationally is not a one-off, and David talked about this. You need a strategy. You need to consider how you're going to plan your export future. It is not something you can do one-off. When I started doing exports many, many years ago, we looked at just exporting surplus product, and that was great in those days, but you can't do that now. You can't build up a relationship with a company overseas and then decide, 3 months later you can't export because the market here is more favourable in pricing. You have to have a strategy, and you need to stick to that strategy. Irrespective of whether the motivation is based on someone coming to you or you going to them, you still have to have a strategy. Is going global right for you? Well, there are many benefits to exporting, but you also have to have commitment. You have to have management commitment and resources, financial resources. You need to understand market entry, export experience. You need to have an understanding of market demand, exporting, understanding of logistics and packaging and documentation, and you need to consider timeframes. As David mentioned, there are particular seasonal issues in this industry, so you need to understand them fairly competently. You need, for export success, a commitment of time as well, attention and resources. Do you have an export champion? Having someone like Ausveg around, and or anyone that you know that exports, that can give you guidance, that you can talk to. There's lots of people out there that are successful exporters that are happy to give you the time and give you commitment in showing you what to do. Do you have the time to commit to a structured marketing campaign? Can your business support overseas companies and customers? Can you commit to undertaking regular market visits? You need to network. You need to understand what happens in an overseas market. Whether you go over there or whether you get information back or whether you just go on a trip, whether you go on one of the missions that Ausveg put forward, or whether you are involved in one of the missions that Ausveg brings out here and you meet prospective buyers. You need to do these things. One of the interesting things, and I'm sure you've all done it, I know that when I've talked at some of these sessions before, when I go overseas, the first thing, well, not the first thing, but one of the things I do is I go to the supermarkets and I walk through and I look at what's being sold in the supermarkets and how they're being sold and the prices. You need to do your homework. There's a lot of ways you can do that without actually travelling, but if you can travel, it's a great way to understand the market. Develop your core offer. Now, David did talk about this, and he talked about packaging. And I agree, you need to consider how you're going to show your product, how you're going to market your product. It could be, without any packaging, the best carrot in the world. You need to say that. You need to say it's the best lettuce or the best cucumber or the best grape. I know that's not a veggie, but you need to do that. You need to say what your product is and how you believe, and you need to feel it from inside, how great it is. Okay? Packaging is important. But if you don't have packaging and you're just doing the carrots, you need to say they're the best and they come from this region and it's really good and we do the harvesting like this. You need to have a story behind it, and your website needs to have that story. You need to show how proud you are, and you need to, I hope your carrot lives up to that wonderful story that you do about it, but you need to do that. You can't just say I've got a carrot or I've got a bag of carrots or a container of carrots and that's it. You have to believe in it and you have to show it. So define your competitive advantage. My carrots are great. They're harvested. They're family business. We've been going for 20 years. The family farm is this, and show pictures. Do all of those things. That's plenty. It may not get you the deal, but you've got to be proud and show what you're doing. Your core offer is that I can supply carrots whenever. Your unique service position is this, and your positioning is this. It's not that hard to come up with ideas if you want to market yourself, and that's what you've got to do. You have to market yourself and the product. Australian fresh produce market overview. Okay, less than 10% of Australian growers produce for export, and there's probably been reasons for that over the years. The market wasn't there, the pricing wasn't there. But if you want your farm, your produce, your company, your business to develop, you have to look at exports. The market is not big enough in Australia to allow everyone to have just an Australian market going forward. Depends on where you want to go with your business. If you want to be a small market farm, then that's fine. If you want to develop the business and grow, you have to look at export. Increased wealth and population growth in the Middle East and much of Asia has resulted in increased demand for high quality product. The market is there. And if we're exporting great product, which we grow here in Australia, then the market will grow. It will grow. North Asia is showing great, strong growth and probably has more capacity for future potential. Again, David's talked about all of this. The Middle East is also showing exceptional growth, largely on the back of the continued carrot trade. But the veggies are acceptable. We have great quality and we have a great reputation. And David did talk about this. The 2016-17 year was another year of export growth for the Australian vegetable industry. We are a net exporter of fresh vegetables, and we exported over 190,000 tonne and 246 million in fresh vegetables in the 2016-17 year. I think, David, you gave later figures than that, but it's still pretty good even in 16-17. I think there's been 4 consecutive years of growth. Is that correct? Yes. So, the business is there. And it will grow, and the export strategy is there to follow. So we need to keep doing this. We need to keep considering the export market. Okay, a comprehensive snapshot of trade data for the vegetable industry. Now, David did show this, but it is available on the export with AusVeg, and you can ring them or you can go to AusVeg and get a copy of that strategy and that the figures that David talked about. Market overview. Australian growers are well positioned to take advantage of the opportunities that overseas vegetable markets offer. We need to curb the oversupply of product. We need to contribute to a reduction in price pressure for the domestic market. That's what exports will do. However, currently only 4%, and I mentioned that earlier, only 4% of Australian growers produce vegetables for export. Increased wealth and population in the Middle East, and this is back to where I said about what it will do for the Australian economy. If we can export more, the Australian economy will grow, and that's where we need to be. We're a long way from anywhere, and we have a great country, a great product. We need to make sure that we keep ourselves moving forward, and export in any category is important. Okay, the growing demand has contributed to Australian vegetable exports increasing, And I won't go into any more of the strategy, but the most export destinations for Australian vegetables are within Asia and the Middle East, with the largest markets being Japan, New Zealand, Singapore, the UAE, and Malaysia. Okay, there are many opportunities, and the key development for vegetable exports has been the free trade agreements, or one of the key. I'm not going to say it's the only key development. There's been favourable currency reductions, but we have a number of free trade agreements, which I'll talk about in a second. The Japan, South Korea and China free trade agreements have been really important. Perhaps not China, but the Japan and Korea ones have been really important. This new FTA, the TPP 11, will be very important. It will go through, and we will be very, very favourably looked at with our product range. Okay, the biggest impediments, and David mentioned this as well, is market access. So it's all very well having these wonderful free trade agreements, but we don't have market access to all of these, for all our products into these free trade countries. We're working on that. The Australian government is working on that. And as David mentioned, Hort Innovation is working on that. We need to keep going, though, with the free trade agreements. The only way that we've got the access we have already is because we have got free trade agreements into those countries, and we're able to manage the protocol regulations to get those accesses put forward. Okay, one of the things that I would really like to stress is, David talked about the strategy for the veggie industry. What about your own strategy? Has everyone got a business plan, an export business plan? Not just a business plan, but an export business plan. You need to spell out everything you want to do, how you're going to start, what you've got in finances to spend on this development, where you're going to look at, why you're looking at that country, how you're going to price. I mean, you need to have these things. Even on a market visit, you need to have an idea of what your pricing is going to be, how much product you can sell, how much and when you can sell it, what your pricing, packaging might be, the logistics. You need to have a plan. It's no use thinking, I'm going to do this, and someone comes to you and you've got to start all from the beginning. You need to be ready for this. You need to have that plan. You need to know who's going to manage it. The Export Champion will give you an idea on how much is involved in exporting. It is not easy, but it can be successful, and that's the main criteria that you need to take away from this today. There will be points where you get very frustrated and very concerned about, well, no one's buying and I haven't, done this well, or I've lost on this one. That's why a plan is important. You need to have the plan worked out. You will make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes, even experienced exporters, but you need to be able to rebound from those mistakes and make them not as bad as they could be, okay? All right, navigating the regulatory requirements to go global. Now there are a lot of regulatory requirements in the veggie industry. There's a lot in all industry to go global. To leave a country and go into another country, there's a lot of requirements to manage. However, the veggie industry does have a few that are a little bit more than some other products. Free trade agreements. We have a number of free trade agreements, as I mentioned earlier. They have been very beneficial. But I'm going to say one thing at the start. A free trade agreement does not mean free trade. It's not going to give you everything as an open market, free into that market, and give you the benefit of having no duties or taxes or market barriers. That's not what a free trade agreement does. It gives access to a market with negotiations for further benefits to come from that access. When a free trade agreement is first negotiated, it isn't just free duty and free this and free that across the board. If we look, I did a couple of, wrote down a couple of things. I had to write it down because it was a bit complicated. Not complicated, but a lot of numbers. So if we look at the CHAFTA agreement, which has been in place since 2015, okay, for carrots into China, and I know you're all going to say, well, they can't go there, but just hear me out. So there's a tariff that you have to figure out what your HS code is. In December 2014, when it actually first came in, so the CHAFTA agreement was signed in December 2014, the duty rate on carrots was 10.4%. On the 1st of January, it was 13%. On the 1st of January, and that was the idea that they signed the free trade agreement 2 weeks before the beginning of the new year, so that on the 1st of January, which is the common date for all free trade agreements to churn over each year, if you like. So on the 1st of January 2015, the duty rate went down to 10.4%. Over the years, starting on the 1st of January 2018, the duty rate now is 2.6%. Starting January 2019, the duty rate will be 0%. And that sounds wonderful, but the protocols are the problem. So they're still working on these protocols, and they will happen. They will happen. So, but in other areas, and not in the veggie industry, but in other areas, these free trade agreements have given lots of access into China for other products. So it's not all about veggies, even though we're all veggie exporters and growers here today. These free trade agreements are done for all of Australia. So if we look at Thailand, and this is where it becomes a bit more complicated. So we have what we call the TAFTA agreement, which is between Australia and Thailand. So it's a bilateral. So is the CHAFTA agreement. Every one of these agreements has an acronym, okay? So if we look at the TAFTA agreement between Australia and Thailand, that came into force on January 2005. The duty rate on carrots was 30%. 30%. In January 2010, it went down to 0%. So again, market accesses have problems, but that's a great saving on duty, okay? If we go to the Australian and New Zealand and ASEAN Free Trade Agreement, which came into force on January 2012, the duty rate on carrots into Thailand was 5%. January 2013, it went down to 0%. Okay. Now you're going to say, why have we got two free trade agreements? And there'll be some experienced exporters in the room that know about the different trade agreements, but for those that don't, we have two free trade agreements with Thailand. We actually have three if the TPP 11 goes through. Okay. Which one do you use? These are all part of the regulatory requirements and knowledge you have to have. I would always recommend the Australia-New Zealand ASEAN Free Trade Agreement is a multilateral agreement. It was a later agreement than the TAFTA agreement. I would always recommend going with the later one. It's going to be more modern and it's going to be more better negotiated, if that's the case. It's probably not the right thing to say, but better negotiated. If we look at the new TPP 11 that's coming into place, that's got Thailand too. I would be going with that one when it comes through. That is going to be a better trade agreement than the other two. So these are all the difficulties. If you look at the slide there, the FTAs address many things. Barriers to trade, including IP, restriction on foreign service providers, government procurement policies that favour domestic industry, and customs procedures. So there's a lot of things in a free trade agreement. One thing, though, is that if you can't get your exporting right, your export process, at the end of the day, a free trade agreement's not going to help you, okay? It's like baking a cake and your free trade agreement is the cherry on top of the cake. That's what it is. It's not the cake. So you need to get your export processes in place. You need to do your planning. You need to understand the market and you need to do everything to get to that market correctly. The free trade agreement will give you a benefit in that market, but only if you can do the things correctly to get to that market. Okay, these are all of the free trade agreements on the left-hand side that we have already. There's quite a few there. And then the ones on the right-hand side are the ones we're negotiating. In fact, the EU one is actually, they're starting to negotiate that in the next month. So that will open up, talking about onions, I'm not sure if that'll open up the market a little bit more for the onions in about 5 years when they finish the negotiations, but it probably will. It'll probably open it up quite a lot for the onion industry, more, okay? As I said, there's quite a lot there, and we are working really hard. There's a lot of ones that lap over into each other. The Gulf one, by the way, the Australian Gulf Cooperation Council, FTA, has been discussed. I don't think they've actually negotiated a lot, but it's been discussed for about 10 years. but it's still on the list. And I heard the other day, they're still talking about reopening or restarting the conversation. So I don't know if that'll play a great part in, I didn't look up the tariffs, but I'll show you how you can do that and look up all the different tariffs for the different products. So each FTA is negotiated separately, and while there are common elements, each reflects the negotiating power and the particular issues for the countries involved. As such, each is slightly different, and care needs to be taken when identifying opportunities. That is why I'm saying going for the later FTAs is better, particularly where there's multi-FTAs in place, I should say. Going for the latest one is much smarter than just going for the first one. So the Australia-Thailand one, TAFTA, is there, and sometimes the buyer will say use that, but I would always recommend that you go for the last one because it's going to be a smarter FTA. All right, we have, and this is not probably the right product, but orange juice into Korea. If we look at Korea, the South Korea Free Trade Agreement, so we have some citrus, the citrus gentleman talking afterwards, after lunch. If we look at orange juice into South Korea, when we first did our free trade agreement with South Korea, which was probably 2016, we were getting very high 30% duty on orange juice into South Korea. We were trying to compete with America or the USA, who had a free trade agreement and had no duty on their product at all. So that shows you how the competitiveness of these free trade agreements can benefit you. Now we have no duty on orange juice. We're as competitive with our orange juice as the USA. And hopefully with the distance of geography, we're a lot more competitive because we can get there a bit quicker. Okay, so these free trade agreements are important. They might not feel like we're getting anywhere with them, but they are working. They are working. Okay, a couple of things to remember about free trade agreements. They're an agreement between countries and not individuals or companies. So when a free trade agreement is used in the shipment, it's not about you and the company, it's about you and the country rules. That's why the market access is still got to be considered each time. Despite the opportunities and advantages in the FTAs, it does not address the risks of doing globally your business deal. Okay, it doesn't help you if there's a legal issue. It doesn't help you if well, it can help you if there's a legal issue. There's some wonderful clauses called the ISDS clauses that come into play. That's where countries can take each other to international court, but that doesn't help you as a business. If you have an issue with your buyer, you still have to do this between you and the buyer, especially if it's on a free trade agreement issue. Okay, it's important to be aware that non-tariff barriers will still exist in each country that Australia has an FTA with. These barriers can be a significant deterrent to doing business in a country, and the market access is the first and most important one, or the worst one out there. Okay, the secondary market barriers are phytosanitary or sanitary conditions, quotas. So countries have a right to put quotas on, even under a free trade agreement. They have a right to put quotas on product import. So it could be that a buyer wants to buy your product, but the country quota has, or his quota, depending on how the quota works in that country, is gone. It's finished. So he can't buy it until next year. And whether he gets the import permit to allow that quota to come in is another thing. So there's lots of market access issues, Okay. How do they actually determine whether a product can come in? And I'm not talking about market access, but when a product gets to a border, how do they determine that that product can come across the border? They determine it by the HS code, which is the harmonised system code. All products in the world are coded to an HS code, which is an internationally recognised code. So a carrot has a code. In fact, it is 07061011, or it's 070610, 6 numbers. Okay, so every carrot in the world has the same code. When it reaches a border, that code is what determines whether it crosses that barrier or not. Okay, so people play with codes. You can't play with a carrot code. Okay, I don't think you can play with a carrot code at all. But machines, you can knock down a machine into parts and you can get it in as parts, which might get it across a border. You can't do that with carrots. You might be able to get it into a carrot juice, which would be a different code. So they're all the different complexities of the HS system that need to be considered as well. You need to classify your product correctly. You need to understand where it sits in that system, in the system. You need to understand the free trade agreement into the country, if there is one, that we're going into. And all of the countries that are mainly on the list of your veggie exports, except the UAE, well, let's say the Gulf countries, have a free trade agreement, basically. Or most of them under the TPP will have a free trade agreement. So, you know, there's opportunity there. It's just whether the market access and the sanitary regulations will allow it, the quotas, the trade barrier problems. Okay. So I've talked about the trade tariff classification. What about certificates of origin? How does someone know that your product is able to go into a country duty-free or with a benefit? There needs to be a certificate of origin or a statement of origin for everything to go across a barrier into a country that is going to have a tariff benefit from that. So in other words, any free trade agreement country, you have to prove your product meets that country requirement. In other words, it meets the tariff regulation in that country. So how do you do that? We have a number, as I showed you, of free trade agreements. Every one of them has a different way of showing that you need to prove origin. If we're exporting to New Zealand, and I'm sure there's quite a lot that have known the New Zealand market, how do we verify origin into New Zealand? What's the percentage of the origin? And I know an apple is an apple, or an orange is an orange, and a carrot is a carrot. But if you were to bring in carrots from overseas to supplement your crop, and you were sending those carrots across to New Zealand, can you do that under the free trade agreement? You have to verify the origin. Wherever you send your product, even though it's out of the ground, you still have to verify your origin of product. Okay? Going into New Zealand, you just say on your invoice, it's Australian origin. And it only has to be 50%. And I know that's not going to be what a carrot is, but it only has to be 50% Australian origin. But if you're going into, let's say, Korea, how do you verify the origin? And what percentage? These are all the things you need to understand as part of your export process. Okay? There is a particular certificate of origin, a CAFTA certificate of origin that you have to do to verify the origin. So there's additional cost already in verifying origin. It's not hard to get the certificate of origin, and your freight forwarder in a lot of instances will do it for you, but it still needs to be done. Okay? If you're going into any of the countries under the TPP 11, the benefit is under this TPP 11, and as I said, it's the newest trade agreement, self-certify. So like New Zealand, you just do a statement or you put it on your invoice. Okay? So, and you can do it once. You can actually do a certificate of origin as well and certify it once for the year, and that completes for the whole year. You can do that with Korea as well. If you're going into China with particular product, you can actually do retrospective origin if you don't do it up front. I'm not going to go through every free trade agreement. I'm just trying to make the point that you need to understand. You need to have a freight forwarder that understands, and you need to understand the costs involved in this. Okay? It is not just doing something and hoping that it'll get across the border. There are rules and regulations, there's documentation, there's all sorts of criteria for a product to leave one barrier and go across another barrier. Leaving Australia alone is also an issue. Okay, so tariff considerations. The TPP 11, they're the countries that are going to be involved in the TPP 11. All right, so we've got Australia, Brunei, Canada, Chile, Japan, Malaysia, Mexico, Peru, New Zealand, Singapore, Vietnam. Does anyone think that Mexico might be a good export place to go to? Any opportunities do you see in Mexico? We already have a Peru free trade agreement. We already have a Chile free trade agreement. Japan, Malaysia, Canada. Any opportunity in Canada, do you think? Don't need to rush me, but just at the end of the day, there's opportunity now in another 3 countries that we don't have a free trade agreement. Might not sound much, but this free trade agreement allows across the board. Okay, it gives us access to all those countries, and this is the one I'd be using to most of the countries where we already have a free trade agreement. As I said, it has been signed. It hasn't been ratified by Australia. Japan ratified theirs the other day. Canada has theirs in Parliament being ratified now. It will be. I don't see that the 11 countries will not ratify their agreement, particularly with the current trade, what's the right word, trade concerns in the world at the moment. I think the 11 countries pushed ahead when the USA pulled out of the TPP-12 with the view that they wanted to show that it was a free trade system and that the world still wanted to trade globally and fairly and have a trade system in place that was honoured and controlled and regulated. So I think that we will sign off. I don't believe the Australian government will not sign off. We've done our economic modelling, we've done everything. I think that this will probably come into play, but you only need 6 countries to sign off on this, and then it starts. So as I said, 2 have signed off already. If we get another 4, it doesn't matter whether Australia signs or not. We won't be in it. We won't get the benefit if we don't sign, but it will come into play. I think it'll look really bad if we don't get it, if we don't sign off on it, because Australia was a really big pusher of getting this done without the USA when the USA pulled out. So I think that this will go ahead, and I'm really happy and looking forward to it. It'll be a good benefit to Australia. Okay, one of the other things that I'd like to show you, and I'm not going to open it up on the internet, but the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade has a tool that is really very interesting. I don't know how many of you have seen this before. It's called the FTA portal, and you can go into it. I can't show you here. Well, I can. If you look at down the bottom, if you can see that, it actually says the goods. So you'd put in either carats or you'd put in the HS code, and you would pick, that select just brings up export or import. So remembering everything that we do under a free trade agreement works both ways. So when you see veggies come into Australia, that's how that works as well. So what we send into a country obviously can come back from another country under a free trade agreement or without a free trade agreement. It doesn't matter. It's just the benefits of duty are the rights here. Okay, and then select, and it gives all of the free trade agreements that have been ratified and that are in place at the moment. And then you scroll down, and that's where all this information about what the current tariff is, what the product is. There's lists and lists of products under carrots. There are other veggies under the same HS code. There are then, you can then scroll down to juices or extracts or packaged veggies, all sorts of things. So it's a really good website. It really should be something you just jot down the website search engine number, address, and then keep it. It's really quite important if you want to know where your product sits in another country. Okay. Obviously, it doesn't have a country we don't have a free trade agreement with at the moment. All right, other regulatory requirements, which you would all know about, are the food standards and their requirements. So because your product is a food, it does have very specific legislated standards, particularly in highly developed economies, such as the EU and USA. Understand your obligations under that importing country's law. All right, resources include the US Food and Drug Administration, Japanese External Trade Organisation, JETRO. They have an office in Australia in most states, most major cities. Your hazard analysis, so your HACCP, which a lot of you would already have. Most of you would already have your ISO standards. Most countries want you to meet these regulations to get into their country. The Codex, and into Asia, the Asian Food Law Guide. You just put in your search engine, all of those will come up. But this is where you need information from people that know these things. You need to have guidance. If you're starting out, you need to be well versed in how this all works, because you can get to a country and the product won't get in because you haven't met the standard of what is required into that country. Okay. David talked about market access, and I won't go into it anymore, except I'll go down to the last paragraph here and I'll talk about MyCore. So all of your products basically, the majority, I'd say about 99%, come under the Australian DEWA system, okay, the Department of Agriculture and Water Resources control. And that means that anything that leaves Australia that is controlled by them, and as I said, about 99% of your product would be, they need to give you authorisation to export. Now, those that are experienced would know all about that. They're probably authorised establishments, they pay the fees, they have the regulatory inspections, and they keep paying the fees. So moving forward, a lot of you would use freight forwarders as well to do all of your phytosanitary requirements. That's fine, no problem with that. They'd be registered as an authorised body to do that certifying for you. MyCore is the guide, that is the DEWA guide to how that product is perceived in another country, okay? So when you go into MyCore, which is on the DEWA site, for those that haven't seen it before, it will, you will go into grains and other products in that area, and you will put in carrots, or you'll put in the botanical name. I haven't got it in front of me to show you, so I'm not sure if it's a botanical name. Anyone know if the botanical name comes up on the... Has anyone looked that up, MyCore? No? Yeah? Is it the botanical name for carrots? What is it? Sorry, that put you on the spot. Okay. Anyway, carrots. All right. Sometimes it just comes up with... What is it? He's going to look it up. Okay. Sometimes it just comes up with the product name, and other times the botanical name will come up. That's fine. You're all experts in what the name should be anyway, not me. So MyCore will come up, and it'll show you, it will come up as a country, and it will show you how and what you've got to do to get your goods into that country. But remembering, MyCore is the guide that tells you how to even get it out of Australia. Not just into the other country, but how to get it out of Australia. So it will come up with three lines. It will say import permit, phytosanitary certificate or health certificate, it'll be phytosanitary, and documents, other additional documents. In some countries, there may be an import permit required. In most countries, a phytosanitary will be required, but it will be required to get it out of Australia. So whether the other country wants it or not, even if it says, the buyer says he doesn't want it, you still need to do it if it comes up on the site for getting it out of Australia, okay? And then other documentation are usually clauses and wording that has to go on the phytosanitary. So it'll be pest-free area, it comes from this area, pest-free, all of that. So that's part of the second regulatory issues that you have to face. So you have things like the free trade agreement and understanding the market access, and then you have to look at all the, what's the third part, you have to look at all the codes and requirements of that product in that country. So does it need HACCP, does it need ISO certification, does it need the codex system, what does it need? And then the third part is, does it need the DEWA approval to get it out of Australia? Does it need documentation to get it into that country overseas? Okay. However, the big killer on this is that just because it's on the DEWA site doesn't mean it can get into the other country. So that's another thing that you've got to consider. You need to do your homework. You need to understand that if carrots come up, whatever the word is, good, I won't say it then either. Okay. If carrots come up on the China site on DEWA and it says phytosanitary whatever, you need to do your homework. It doesn't mean that they'll get in there, okay? You really need to do your homework. That's why you need good advice. You need to learn as much as you can and do your homework and have your business plan worked out. Very, very important to ensure that you understand all three of these have to work, not just one of them to get into a country, okay? All right, that's what so the plants, the grain and plants is the square that, and DEWA controls the exports for all of those products, but you just need to click into the plants. And they've got every country up there, but just because, as I said, it's up there and your carrots are there or your cucumber or whatever doesn't mean it can get into a particular country. Okay, one of the good things is that the WTO, the World Trade Organization, is working towards trying to get a lot of these things sorted out, the barriers into other countries. But you know, any country has the right to protect their border. When you think about it, a country, even Australia does that. When we had cyclones up in Queensland, oh, we're here now, aren't we? Queensland. Sorry, I'm from Sydney, everyone, so I had to think about that. Love Queensland, love Queensland. So when cyclones were up here many, many years ago, Australia banned the importation of bananas when all the banana plantations were wiped out. They didn't do that, and you might remember that was when bananas were about $14 or $15 a kilo. They didn't do that for any other reason than to protect the new growth of the banana plantations, to make sure there was no imported pests or problems or diseases that came in with other bananas. They wanted to protect the industry and let it regrow. Okay, so Australia does it. Every country has a right to protect their borders, and we can't argue with another country when they won't let our product in there, because we do exactly the same thing. Maybe not as much as some other countries, but we do it. So we have to think along those lines. We have to work through and keep doing things the right way. Okay, so in 2015, the 163 members then of the WTO agreed to abolish all agricultural export subsidies. I'm not sure that they've all done that, but this is how we're working through trade negotiation at high level and at country level to try and improve the import and export systems of countries. Okay, the fourth probably regulatory item is the maximum residue limits. And there's a very, very good list that I think you have, Michael, somewhere on your website or somewhere about all of that. Yeah. So I won't go into too much about that, but you need to consider that when you're looking at your products and where they're going. Okay, market research, just quickly, you need to create a successful mix of the right product, sold at the right price, to the right place, using the most suitable promotion. That's with anything that exports out of Australia. You need to have the system in place. You need to look at the market and decide how it's going to work and how you fit into that market. If it all looks too hard, move on to another market, okay? Don't waste your time in a market that doesn't have access in the way you want it to work. It doesn't have buyers that will buy your product. It doesn't have the price range that you want to get. You may need to reconsider those things, but move on and try a few markets before you decide where you want to concentrate on. Okay, through market research will make sound export marketing decisions for your company. There are 3 steps. Where would you like to do business? Where do you have a possible association? Networking, knowing people, missions, anything like that is helpful. Getting to know someone opens a door. Trying to do it from a laptop to another laptop is quite hard sometimes, very hard. So you need to try and do missions, you need to try and do market visits, you need to get the different organisations to help you understand that market. Research on your potential market, do it with Austrade or the internet or whatever. The internet's fabulous these days in trying to find this information. If I go back to when I first started to export, we didn't have these benefits. We had to do it the hard way. Okay, primary market research, direct contact with the experts, customers or other sources of information. Okay, you need to understand the market metrics, the size and characteristics. You need to understand the entry requirements and the in-country logistics. There's no good, no use sending something to a country and getting it across the border, then it has 2 weeks to get to where it's got to go, and it's ruined by the time it gets to where it has to go in that country. It might sound a bit silly, but if you're looking at logistics within a country, even though you're not involved in that, and perhaps even if you've been paid already, it's not your problem. But it is your problem if they won't buy it again because it didn't arrive in a great condition, okay? So it's important to understand where it's going, where and how it's going to be handled in that country as well, so that you can understand what that product's got to go through and whether it is going to arrive in a condition that makes them want to come back and buy more. Okay, lots of places to get help. associations like AusVeg, GrowCom, New South Wales farmers, Northern Territory farmers, potato growers, Tasmanian farmers, the list goes on, Vegetables WA, bilateral chambers of commerce and business councils, chambers of commerce and organisations that can assist with the certificates of origin, that's where they have to come from, the Export Council of Australia, okay, government agencies that you need to probably look at would be Austrade, Austindustry. Industry has a business portal, which is business.gov.au. Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, DEWA, EFIC, IP Australia, Office of Infrastructure and Regional Development. Okay, FTA resources, the FTA portal that I showed you a minute ago, and ANZ, for anyone that banks with ANZ, but anyone can go on their website, has a really good B-Trade Ready portal that you might like to look at. It has some really good information. More than just a trade FTA portal, it has a lot of information on there. Okay, EFIC, I don't know if anyone has heard of EFIC, Export Finance Insurance Corporation, a government body that can provide loans and finance if you want to expand your business, if you want to expand to accepted applicants, of course. They are specialising in SMEs, particularly at the moment. It's a government initiative, and they are looking to support business that has a good plan, a business plan that looks at how they can develop maybe infrastructure in Australia to increase their capacity, all sorts of things like that. So have a look at their website as well. Okay, and the Export Market Development Grant, for those that export, there are return benefits in getting your marketing costs back from the Australian government. So anything you can get back is another benefit. Okay, it costs a lot to market. It costs a lot for a trip. Not a lot. You need to do it, but anything that you spend marketing your product, using consultants overseas, using distributors overseas, anything like that can be claimed back on your EMDG grants. So have a look at that as well. Okay. And that's the different things, the overseas representation expenses, marketing visits, free samples, trade fairs, seminars, promotional literature, so even your website, okay? Those sorts of things where you're promoting internationally. Overseas buyers expenses and registration or insurance of eligible intellectual property. So if you have a particular product and you package it and you call it a really nice, fancy, groovy name, then you might want to IP that, then you can claim that cost back as well. Okay. Top 10 tips, do your research. I should have finished with that one. Formulate a basic export strategy, be informed, consider the appropriate additional training, visit your markets of interest. Don't forget risk management, prepare your product for export, do your due diligence. There's a lot of checking things there. Use government and industry association services, especially AusVeg and the ECA, and be patient and persistent. I really don't know anyone that wins their first export order in one day. You know, really you have to work at it, and it will be sustainable if you do it the right way. Okay, that's a disclaimer. Okay, Export Council. Thank you. Okay.